What if I told you that there's a massive, unknown southern continent that is responsible for humanity's survival and full of riches? Well, I'd be a 16th century explorer, and I'd be wrong. But this search for a non-existent continent led to the discovery and naming of Australia and much of the southern world. This whole southern continent rumor started, like many things in Western culture, with the ancient Greeks. Despite what you may have heard about Columbus, even the Greeks knew the Earth was round, and several notable mathematicians of theirs even gave estimates of its diameter. But the Greeks hadn't discovered gravity, well, at least not fully. They knew there was some force pulling objects in the air back to Earth, but assumed that those objects fell because of their elemental nature, rather than a universal gravitational force. And without gravity, their model of the solar system looked pretty different from ours. In their model, every star and planet rotated around the Earth, which itself stayed perfectly still. However, they had a problem with their astronomical theory. They knew the Earth was big, and that since it was round, it had to have a top or bottom half, which they called hemispheres. But all the land they knew much about was in the northern hemisphere, which didn't make any sense. If the northern hemisphere had more land than the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere would weigh more, unbalancing the Earth. As a result, the Earth would tip over, and everyone and everything would fall off into the abyss and die. But since everyone was still in fact living, and the Earth had not, and probably never, tipped over, the Greeks assumed that there had to be some massive, unknown southern continent to counteract the weight of the northern hemisphere's land. Eventually, they decided to write that down, and the guy who wrote it, Ptolemy, was a pretty big deal. He basically invented cartography and astronomy, with his proposal of an Earth with everything else rotating around it remaining accepted for thousands of years afterwards. Coming from Ptolemy, everyone at the time, and everyone for the next 1,000 years, thought this whole southern continent thing just had to be legit. The Romans certainly agreed, and they called this new continent Terra Australis. Don't worry about the fancy Latin name, it just means southern land. Say what you want about the Romans, but they weren't exactly the most inventive when it came to names. For the next 1,000 or so years, the idea of Terra Australis remained unchallenged, but it still had its fair share of controversy. In the medieval era, geographers figured out how equators worked, and came to the conclusion that it would be impossible to pass the equator due to its extreme heat, caused by the direct concentration of the sun's rays. This led to what, in hindsight, can only be called a rather silly debate. First, if Terra Australis existed, surely it had to have people. After all, if it was as big as Europe, Africa, and Asia, and far more heavy, then it had to be filled with life. That posed a bit of a problem for the church for semi-complicated reasons. Essentially, the church held that every human had to be descended from Adam and Eve, the first humans who very famously ate apples and played in gardens. But since the equator was, by everyone's estimation at the time, fundamentally impassable, no descendant of Adam and Eve could ever reach and populate any southern landmasses. If no descendant could reach there, no humans could live there without violating the church's doctrine and the Bible. But all that was eventually thrown out the window when the Portuguese began to explore Western Africa in the 1450s. Inching closer and closer to the equator, and surviving, the Portuguese came back with the conclusion that the Earth and the equator could be navigated and passed. There was no line of death that was the equator. Up until now, nobody had really been crazy about Terra Australis. No studies or extensive literature or expeditions to find it. But all that changed when the New World was discovered. Caribbean colonies made bank for the Spanish, so everyone in the colonial game rushed as fast as they could to find Terra Australis, assuming that since it was an even larger continent, it would bring even more riches. Not 40 years later, they encountered a slight problem. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, proving that Africa was larger and longer than they expected. That meant that Terra Australis was more southern than they predicted. What followed was about a century and a half of guessing games, speculation, and jumping to conclusions. Anytime any new southern land was found, from Indonesia to islands in the Indian Ocean to Tierra del Fuego in modern-day Chile, everybody got hyped up, thinking that they, at last, had found the legendary continent. But, of course, several voyages afterward would always show the land was either A, smaller than expected, or B, not connected to any larger unknown bodies, preventing it from being a continent. As a part of this, the Dutch found Australia, and naturally proclaimed it the true Terra Australis. Obviously, it wasn't, and when they realized this, they slapped the name New Holland on it to claim the country all for themselves. They didn't attempt to settle it, though, and neither did the Spanish, who investigated the country for themselves a little while later. So, New Holland, as it was then called, was basically a backwater in the colonial game. Though attempts were made at trading with the native people, nobody tried to colonize it, and only shipwrecks and the occasional marooning brought Europeans into contact with Australia. Until the British showed up. They set up a penal colony in the south, but kept the name New Holland for the continent, or the country. I guess it didn't have anything better. Meanwhile, everyone and their mother continued to hunt for the real Terra Australis, to predictable results. But that didn't stop people from hyping up the continent, though. Alexander Dampier, a British geographer, gave a ballpark estimate of about 50 million people for the continent's population, and said the continent was host to an advanced society greater than the Incan Empire. This hype train led to Britain's dispatch of Captain Cook to the Pacific, with the express goal of either discovering or ruling out entirely the possibility of Terra Australis. His voyages resulted in the discovery of Hawaii, the proper identification of New Zealand, and a sad conclusion. Terra Australis, as everyone knew it, couldn't exist. He didn't find any land in temperate zones, meaning the only possible continent would be in the cold, frigid, entirely uninhabitable Antarctic Circle. This was a nail in the coffin for the idea of Terra Australis, ending the millennia-long hypothesis of the ancient Greeks. The name was done that, though. Since Terra Australis was dead, the British decided to ditch the weird New Holland thing and adopt a name that didn't associate their colony with another country. Australia, from Australis. They assumed no other southern land would be found, and that Australia was big enough to be the next best thing. Of course, they were wrong. Antarctica is definitely a thing, but by the time Antarctica was discovered, everyone was used to calling Australia Australia. So, when you wonder why Australia is called Australia, just know it's because of a quest spanning thousands of years based on the ideas of a couple ancient Greeks.